Let's bring in CTV News political commentator and former NDP leader Tom Mulcair. Tom, so we hear more talk about pipelines, clearly, too, as Mark Carney, at least in the last little bit, tabling this idea earlier this week of reviving Keystone XL. What do you make of this conversation, too? He's talked about wanting to make Canada an energy superpower, but just as you heard from the Conservatives House leader, it's not going to dictate or move away from, again, selling our energy to the United States.
Yeah, trying to resuscitate the Keystone XL pipeline sounds like a bit of an odd idea, frankly. You know, the Americans have had it on the table for a long time, and it's basically there that it got blocked. Trump was there for 4 years previously. Keystone XL was on the table before he came in, and it was still on the table when he left, and nothing had happened with it. Eventually, the proponents said, well, it's just not going through. Now, for Carney to be saying that it could go through, what does that actually mean? As I think that Andrew Scheer, is simply saying the truth when he says, look, if you're not allowed to take more oil out of the ground, what's going to go into that pipeline? And that's the other question. Matt, Canada has a history of exporting our natural resources raw. All of the value-added jobs go somewhere else. If we're going to do this again, we're going to be sending lots of raw bitumen to the Gulf Coast of Texas to be shipped wherever else in the world, but all of the jobs around that are going to be American jobs. We haven't done much except extract and export. At the same time, Danielle Smith is saying, no, she actually wants a second pipeline to the Pacific coast, a little bit further up the BC coast than the one. BC government ferociously opposed to that. And where are the Conservatives in all this? They're at the same time asking Carney to remove the tanker ban that stops those tankers that would have to be brought in from that upper pipeline. And there's no answer to that either. So I think that they're just flailing. They'd gone to Washington saying they were going to talk about steel, aluminum, and all of a sudden energy was on the table. And frankly, if it's Keystone XL, it should be a non-starter for Canada, especially for someone like Mark Carney, who knows full well that Canada has obligations under the Paris Accord, and we've got to start doing something to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and respect the idea that we have to think about future generations whenever we take a decision in the government.
Yeah, well, let's expand upon that if we can and some of the fallout, right? It was maybe going to be steel, it was maybe going to be aluminum, talk about the sectoral tariffs, and this really does seem to be the only development that has been made public about that meeting between Mark Carney and Donald Trump. Is that, Pierre Poilievre was quick to jump on it in question period yesterday?
Yeah, well, with
clearly.
good reason. Yeah.
Right, yeah, and so what do we make?
It makes life easier for an opposition leader to be able to take shots at that's for sure.
So what do we make of the fallout, Tom? Is that is still, I'm not saying that it's done yet at this point, but, without any news or without any significant developments, not even necessarily a win for the Prime Minister in this, it still is tough.
But everything in politics is instantaneous, especially since the advent of social media. So Mark Carney is someone with deep experience at the highest level internationally. He knows how the game is played. He went into that meeting with a very clear mandate. He said, I will leave that meeting if it's a bad deal. He's always repeated that no deal is better than a bad deal. And he seems to have stuck with that because Trump was trying to sell it as being, oh, the Canadians are going to be so darn happy with what I have to propose. They had their meeting in the White House. Then they had a private meeting. And then Dominic LeBlanc said, no deal, we're going to continue talking. That's the good news. Yesterday, Mark Carney was saying that we're going to get a better deal. Now, that is interesting because that's called raising expectations. And in politics, that's the last thing you want to do unless you can deliver. So my sense of it is that Carney knows that there is something in the works because the Americans need a deal as much as we do. American consumers are hurting. The price of a car or a pickup truck is going to increase greatly. Cost of building a house in the U.S. is going to increase greatly with the 45% tariff on softwood lumber because most of the lumber sold in the States comes from Canada. And yet that wasn't one of the main things on the table. So nor was automobiles. So we have to try to get to a place where we're preparing the next Canada-U.S.-Mexico deal. That has to be renegotiated just around the corner. It has to be renegotiated next year. So they came away from this meeting with nothing except more promise. And I do think, though, that Carney is playing his cards close to his vest, and he's got something in the works with Trump, and especially with Lutnick, who is the slightly smarter version of Trump, but somebody who is equally unpredictable.
CTV News political commentator, former NDP leader Tom Mulcair. Thanks for this, Tom.
Good to be with you, Matt.